Hello, good morning, everyone. My name is Gill McKay, and I'm delighted to be part of Speakers Week. Thank you very much, David, for inviting me to do so. So, like you, I am a coach. I'm also a trainer, a speaker, and a recent best-selling author of my book, Stuck: Brain Smart Insights for Coaches. I've got more than 30 years of experience in its broadest sense in learning and development, mainly in corporate life initially, and then in the last 17 years in my own business. And I'm now joint managing director of a company called My Brain International. The clue is in the title. That's my passion. I'm absolutely passionate about the brain and neuroscience, and how understanding a little bit about what's going on up here can help us to build self-awareness, give us some answers perhaps about why we are the way we are, and give us permission to really be our authentic selves. Many years ago, I had a wonderful coach and a mentor who was all into the power of the brain, and he absolutely ignited my passion and my spark in this whole area of neuroscience. And now what I do is I help coaches and trainers to use neuroscience in their work so that they can get even better results with their clients and their teams. Now, I've pre-recorded this presentation, this talk, for my Speakers Week, mainly so I can use a PowerPoint slide set. So I'm going to start to share that now. Here we go, share it. If anybody actually does have any ability to be able to, or knowledge of how to share a slide set using a Facebook Live, I'd be really grateful if you could put it in the comments. So I'll minimize that so you don't get distracted by me. It's partly because I want to show you a couple of optical illusions, and difficult to discuss that without having it on the screen. So I'll be sharing the screen, talking in the background, and I will check back later for comments and questions. And David's also very kindly said to message me with a friend's request if you want to know any more afterwards, or learn about the book or anything like that. So I'm delighted to do that as well. So here we go. How neuroscience can add value to your coaching work. As coaches, we've been working with our clients for years very successfully, helping them with a multitude of challenges to gain confidence, perhaps seek clarity, or a space for reflection and learning. What I'm doing today is going to shine a light on neuroscience and try and explain how brain insights can add an additional perspective and enrich a coaching conversation, opening up some new avenues and exploring new insights. For me, talking at a brain level with my clients has equipped me to ask different types of questions and possibly eliciting responses that otherwise I might not have been able to tease out. So, the wonders of technology, the last 20 years have shone really an ever brightening light on this emerging area, and it's to do with technology. So no longer do neuroscientists rely only on autopsies or patients with extreme conditions, or research conclusions from lab experiments with rats and mice to understand the brain. The technology, scanning and technology improvements have given us images to see activity inside the brains of healthy human beings, functioning human beings, and it's now deepening our understanding of the physical side, the physiology behind human behavior and psychology, which is really exciting. Also, what's exciting is that neuroscience is no longer just relevant in the medical or mental health spheres, but increasingly can be applied in business. And it's providing brilliant evidence that is appropriate in so many areas of people development, like employee engagement, performance enhancement, motivation, happiness, the whole remit of coaching and more. And we're going to, of course, be talking about the coaching today. And that really has opened up exciting possibilities for anybody who's interested in the development of self and others. But before we start, I do want to wave a little bit of a red warning flag. There's no doubt about it that neuroscience is popular, it's fashionable, it's topical. You know, every day on social media or a newspaper or blog magazine, we will come across some article or information where a research conclusion has been distorted and perhaps misinterpreted as being the absolute truth around human behavior. You know, there are neurohoroscopes, neurodiets, neuropills, and there are some genuine disciplines emerging that are very exciting, like neuromarketing, it's been around for some while, neuroeconomics, and now even neurolaw. So what I do is I bridge the gap between what I think is neuro-nonsense and the empirical academic research studies that might be a bit weighty, and what I try and do is make them more accessible, to offer evidence that is accessible, current, and interesting, and most importantly useful, so you can apply it with real benefit in your work. So let's start by looking at the brain. This is a build slide here. At the base of our brain and our brainstem, we have what is called the reptilian complex, and just like implied by the name, we share that with reptiles. In human beings, what that does is it runs our body so out of our conscious awareness. So it regulates our hunger and the hormones, our oxygen levels, our blood pressure, the oxygen levels in the blood, blinking, body temperature, etc. We don't need to consciously think about any of that. So we share this with snakes and crocodiles, but they stop there. We then have a multiple overlays that make us uniquely human. The next overlay above the reptilian context is that called the limbic system, which is really the seat of all our emotions. It's required for empathy and emotional connections, sometimes referred to as the mammal brain or the mammalian brain. Mammals have to suckle on their mothers at birth, and hence that emotional bond and the difference between mammals and reptiles. Interestingly, the limbic system is the least researched from an empirical perspective, because quite literally it's in the center of the brain, so it's the most difficult to get to from a scanning perspective. And overlaid on top of the limbic system is the more recent part of the brain in evolutionary terms, the neocortex, which is where our grey matter is. I've just realised that the diagram's brown or pink, depending on your screen. But what the neocortex does, it's all about our self-awareness, managing complexity in relationships, and our conscious thinking, our conscious thought. And then right at the front of the neocortex, we have the prefrontal cortex, also commonly known as our frontal lobes. And these are all about strategizing, thinking ahead, required for planning and forward thinking, anticipation, what's coming next, and very, very different from the mammals. This is what makes us uniquely human. I've got 2 Labradors, and I know there's absolutely no planning that goes ahead. They just play and sleep and eat and just live in the moment completely. And that's true from a brain perspective. They have a very small percentage of a frontal cortex in comparison to human beings. And eminent neuroscientist Elkin and Goldberg uses a really lovely analogy around the prefrontal cortex frontal lobes, describing them to be like the conductor of an orchestra. And just like an orchestra has different sections, the brass section, the string section, the percussion section, just like it's got that, the brain has many distinct areas and regions, and serving distinct functions, doing different things, but they need to work in harmony together for the whole symphony. So what the prefrontal cortex does, it acts as the conductor and uses the other parts of the brain and brings them into play as a means of assembling thoughts and actions and meaning to what's going on. So the frontal lobes are what make us uniquely human. They play a central role in our forming our goals and objectives, and they're necessary for planning and looking ahead, and also evaluating as our actions are successful or not, or less successful or a failure. Right, so this is what I'm going to cover today. There are many reasons for why neuroscience, but I'm really just going to motor through 4 of them and hope to give you a little bit of a whet your appetite and a bit of food for thought around these. But before I do that, I want to show you an optical illusion, because the brain is absolutely fantastic and unique, and it's fabulous and the most complex thing known to man and creates amazing things, but it isn't without its limitations. So let me show you this wonderful optical illusion by a gentleman called Edward Adelson. Please do Google it, because you'll get a much deeper explanation than I'm able in the time to give you today. So a question I would ask you if I was showing you this in a group would be, do you believe me when I say that squares A and B are in fact the same shade of grey or the same colour? And most likely, almost universally, if I was in a group of people, the answer would be no. So what's happening is that this optical illusion is fooling us because of that regularity of the checkerboard pattern. It's also very familiar to us. It leads us to conclude that all the lighter squares are the same shade of grey and that all the darker squares are the same shade of grey, but a different shade of grey. We all have these frameworks in our heads for that checkerboard pattern. We played tiddlywinks or snakes and ladders or drafts or chess throughout our lives, or seen kitchen tiles on the floor, black, white, black, white, black, white. So there's a regularity. So we look at this immediately and think, no, that's not possible. But there's also something else that is going on in this picture as well. There's that big green cylinder on the right-hand side of the page. And what that is doing is it's casting a perceived shadow. So in the picture, our brain is compensating for the fact that square B appears to be in shadow by making us think it's in fact lighter than it appears. I'll show you in a minute that's not true. And this is why squares A and B are the same shade, being the same shade of grey is more obvious when the right side of the picture is covered over than when the left side is. So here's the left side. Probably still think that they're not the same shade because our brain is telling us still that there's a shadow. Now let's cover it over from the right hand side. And because the shadow for most of us disappears, we can now see it's the same shade. If you are seeing that there's still a shadow, then just quickly look away and look again at the picture afresh, and you'll find that you are able, hopefully, to see that they are indeed the same colour. And what is happening is we are hardwired for shadows. Over millions of years of evolution, shadows are important to our safety. And so our brain will see that shadow instantly and immediately tells us, as well as the checkerboard pattern, that the squares can't possibly be the same colour. Moving that on, in order to operate in the complex, busy world of 2020 and beyond, our brains will take shortcuts by jumping to conclusions as soon as it feels it has sufficient information to fill in any blanks from its memory, like shadows. So some of it is ancient hardwired, like that, in order to be able to make sense of what is in front of it. So we take our memories to reach conclusions because the brain likes to have a conclusion. So with that backdrop, let's look at number 1 on my list, which is that coaching can help lay down new neural pathways. Right. So we all have preferences for operating in particular ways. And as we repeat the same activity time and time again, we lay down stronger neural pathways for performing that activity exactly the same way the next time. And then what happens is they become habits, and you don't have to consciously think about the way you do it. It just becomes automatic. It takes less energy to do it. You're just doing it without thinking. So some US research found that more than 40% of the actions that people performed each day in the same location weren't due to actually making conscious decisions, but they were down to habits. Because you're in the same location, the same triggers and cues, your neurological activity gets less and less as that habit locked in, because your brain is following an established routine. That's quite interesting, that we may think we're making a decision, but actually 40% of them are habits. So using routines and automating processes in strategy, it is a strategy to free up cognitive capacity. Because we want to free up our cognitive capacity and our cognitive energy, our brain energy, so we can focus on what's immediately important in front of us and engage our intentional, rational mind, what we refer to, if you like, as conscious thinking. Now, I often use the analogy of a road network as it helps to explain that the connections within the brain get stronger as you're laying down new neural pathways. So imagine that you're asked to create a new city called London. You can see the River Thames running through it. So you put a road network in to connect all the various areas, like the shops, the houses, the business district, the recreation, etc. And they all start off at the same size. So they've all got, say, a couple of lanes at the same width. But after a few years, through different usage of the roads, you will be working on some of them to make them wider, or some of them just to make them narrower. And maybe they just go to turn into a bicycle path or into a minor back street, while others will become 4-lane or 5-lane superhighways, motorways. And it's exactly the same in the brain. We use our superhighways more frequently than the minor back streets or the bicycle paths, and they give rise to more automatic behavior, your habits, and you develop strength, if you like, for accessing those and flow. They just feel easier and more accessible to travel down. and become habits. So as an example, I recently worked with a guy who'd been promoted from a team member to become manager of that team. That can be quite challenging. And he'd previously performed the role that his team members had done. That work was second nature to him. He loved it. He was a top performer, always did really well in his performance reviews, and he felt really valued. Now, even though he was really pleased about his promotion, he found the unlearning of his old role very hard. He actually wanted to carry on doing his own familiar work. What was happening at a physical level, he was accessing those neural routines to do work that was familiar and valuable. So together we worked on setting up new habits and laying down new pathways for the new role. So even though your habits largely function outside your awareness, of course they can be changed. It isn't just about willpower or mind over matter, but due to this brilliant power in the brain called neuroplasticity, throughout the whole of our lives, that road network in our brains, that synaptic network, is constantly changing as we experience the world around us and we learn new information or skills. And at times it may be really useful to use that and learn new skills. But of course, it will take effort to change a habit, conscious focus and energy, brain energy, and concentration. And as coaches, we can help our clients put plans and actions into place. But for some clients, just knowing that at a physical level, they can form new pathways, new neural pathways for a new habit, validates that change is possible. And that in some way, the mantra they may have had of, it's not my fault that they're finding change challenging. And in some ways, is they've been so used to traveling down the same motorway for so long, knowing that can be really like liberating and validating. Just like the shadow and the checkerboard before, we're so used to the purpose of shadows that it sometimes seems impossible that there could be another perspective. So for our clients, they're so used to operating in a particular way that sometimes it just seems either too onerous or even impossible in a perception sense that change is even on the possible agenda for them. Sometimes clients ask me how long it will take to change a habit. And there are so many, I've read so many different timescales out there attributed to new habit formation. 21 days seems to be quite popular, but it obviously depends on so many elements: how committed you are, what you're trying to change, your actual goal, why you want to do it, your cues, what's going on in the environment around you, stress levels, all that sort of stuff. But there is a recent interesting study from University College London, which gives the best estimate at 66 days. They do actually sort of say that, they don't actually recommend that you use 66 days as a magic number, but that was the average time taken to change different types of habits in their studies, which if you talk to somebody about a New Year's resolution, that would take them to March the 6th when those neural pathways would be laid down. But the final point really as coaches is that we are helping our clients also to lay down neural pathways for the habit of reflection. And that's, real goodness too. We're hopefully enabling them to reflect and learn and understand their resourcefulness going forward when our coaching relationship is actually over. So changing habits does take time and energy, but absolutely, of course, change is possible. So here is some research that you may want to take note of. The first one is about the 40% of what we do every day is actually routine, even though we may think it's decisions. And the next one is the one I've just referred to from UCL, of the 66 days to change a habit. So let's move on now to number 2 on my list. And this is all about a scientific approach can actually help some clients. So we've all probably had some clients who prefer to operate in a logical, analytical way, and having an underpinning of evidence, that sort of empirical evidence that supports coaching and development can actually be very helpful. I found that it's helped to perhaps legitimize the perceived soft skills of coaching, of the work being done. And for some of my clients, it's definitely helped to help them to afford the same respect to coaching as they do to other business programs that are perhaps more easy to measure in terms of return on investment. So an example I wanted to share with you was a client who's incredibly busy, spinning multiple plates at a time, and she was really quite proud of herself, her skill at multitasking. That was her language. That at the same time she was overwhelmed, and she was actually getting very little done or finishing all of these tasks that she perceived she was doing at the same time. So we delved into her current habits, and I talked through some research which was very helpful to her. The first thing is multitasking really is a myth. Multitasking suggests doing more than one task at the same time. But what's actually happening is that you're rapidly switching between tasks. Working on multiple tasks at once is far less efficient because it takes extra time to shift your mental gears when you're switching. And for most people, your focus diminishes each time you switch because you're interrupting your pattern. And that's when distraction comes to visit. And actually, for some people, myself included, that's the point at which I probably reach out for a pick-me-up sort of biscuit or a sugary coffee. Some interesting French research showed that working on a single task means that both sides, because you'll have heard of left side of the brain and right hand side of the brain, so working on a single task means both sides of your cortex are working together in harmony. When you add another task in, what happens is the left and right sides of the brain split the labour and work independently. And then if you add another task in, a third task, what they found in their research was that participants consistently forgot one of the task details and made 3 times more mistakes than when they were given 2 simultaneous goals, which is quite interesting. So I think we know that for everyday familiar behaviour, you can do 2 things at work. So you can cook and you can talk on the phone at the same time. The problem comes when you start to bring in, say, 3 focused goals at the same time. So when you're trying to concentrate on 3 at the same time, your brain will usually discard 1. It will, however, depend, of course, on the task and the part of the brain involved in it. So multi or dual tasking while doing natural tasks like eating and walking are okay. Or so you could be chatting, eating a meal, and let's say looking at photos at the same time. But in reality, it doesn't really take much to focus more on one activity and take attention away from another. So you might be having that chat and all of a sudden you miss a question about, so say photo, about photo, or what recipe you were using for the meal. So it's really interesting. This is about task switching. There's another piece of research around tasks and the myth of multitasking, if you like, coming again from UCL. And they found that participants who multitasked during concentrating challenging tasks actually experienced an IQ score decline, similar to people who had stayed up all night. And the IQ score that they measured was the average IQ of an 8-year-old child. This is really interesting. You know, we are doing this to ourselves all the time when we glance at our devices. So if we try and listen to a presentation, when we're checking our emails and our Twitter feed or something, really, in reality, means that little information is going to be stored in the brain from any of those tasks. From the brain's perspective, social media increases the stimulation and the burden, and the stimulation and the burden, which is really quite interesting. So just moving on to the research I've got for you here. The first one is the French research on the dividing of hemispheres and the dual tasking, and the second one is about the IQ. Both are really quite interesting reading. These are the academic papers I'm giving you here, but even if you just read the sort of synopsis of it at the beginning, it'll give you more information that you may find interesting and useful. So let's hop over now to the third one, that using neuroscience in the work really can give you a safe way to discuss emotions, and the slide is showing a representation of evolution, if you like, with more of the emotional brain developing throughout the ages. And I have coached clients over the years who work in hard-hitting organisations who seem to have the attitude that there really is no place for emotional thinking at work. I'm sure you've had that experience. And actually, in many cases, sadly, to the detriment of the client's health. I've personally had that experience as well. It can actually be really, really stressful. And in the emotional area, I've found that talking about neuroscience can help clients to trust their emotions and instincts and start to understand that natural emotions in circumstances are very useful to surface. And, most simply put, this is a really simple illustration. When clients understand that 80% of their neurons reside in the most ancient subcortical part of the brain structures, where all the instinctive and emotional processing goes on, that fact in itself can be really liberating. So 80% of our brain cells, repeating that, reside in the middle and lower part of the brain. So these are the parts of the brain that reside outside of our conscious awareness. So they must be doing something. In fact, mathematically, they must be doing 4/5 of something. So learning to listen to emotions, instinct, and intuition can really help the way that clients approach their situations and their challenges. So at a very simple level, information from your five senses gets into the emotional parts of your brain faster. And that's for survival reasons. So before it reaches your prefrontal cortex thinking brain, it will hit the emotional part of your brain to provide a warning that something dangerous may be around. So by the time your cortex has worked out that a cracked twig under your foot might actually be a snake, the emotional amygdala in the brain is already working on the defense, on protecting yourself. So before you put your language together thinking, oh my goodness, that's a snake, around the possibility that it's a reptile on the floor. Because when you're threatened, your amygdala is on high alert, and it really can serve you well to pay attention to that. That's in the more ancient part of your brain. So as well as the information getting from your five senses coming quicker into the more emotional ancient part of your brain, connections to the emotional limbic system, to the cognitive system, are stronger than the other way round. So in other words, if you're getting a message into your rational brain from your emotional system, it pays you to listen to it, listen to your instincts. So let's say you have a client who seems to be in a spiral of negative thinking. Negative thoughts are very rarely random. Often there will be some sort of underlying emotion or some sort of pattern that triggers that negative thinking and starts the chain that links those thoughts together. And the language that the client will use will emotionally anchor it. You'll hear things like, oh, this always happens to me. I never get the recognition I deserve. It's always my colleagues who get the interesting projects. So your clients will be using generalizations, and those generalizations only strengthen further the emotional anchoring of that experience, and it becomes a spiral. So for people, once you become aware of those personal patterns or themes or triggers, it can become easier to break those links and sever the chains. So there's an eminent professor in UCLA, the University of California, Los Angeles, you may have heard of, Antonio Damasio. He wrote many years ago an excellent book called Descartes' Error, that I've put in the research slide in a moment. And he does an awful lot of research around emotional thinking and emotions. And he says that effective decision making is just not possible without the emotion or motivation and meaning provided by emotional input. And he talks about it when he's discussing a patient in that book called Elliot. Well worth Googling this, so you get the whole story. Elliot was a successful businessman, but had to undergo some surgery for a brain tumor. And during that surgery, he lost part of his brain, some tissue in the orbitofrontal cortex. And what that does, it connects your frontal lobes with the emotional part of your brain. And he became a real life, what I would call Mr. Spock from Star Trek, really able to function at a high level, but with no emotions. But over time, rather than making him completely rational like Mr. Spock, he became paralyzed by every decision in life. And Elliot could think of loads of ideas, but he couldn't choose. He couldn't do anything with them. So Antonio Damasio commented that he started to think that the cold-bloodedness of Elliot's reasoning prevented him from assigning different values that meant something to him, to different options. So his decision-making landscape just didn't really exist anymore because he had no emotional value system to help him get there. So the bottom line is that we need emotions. Emotions instruct us how to act, whether to approach or to avoid something, whether to fight or flight, so flight to fight or to run, or whether some good or bad result may come from the decision that we're approaching. So we need them. Another piece of research came from Brazil, and they showed that cognitive behavioral therapy changes neural circuits involved with dealing with anxiety, which is quite interesting. There seems to be a benefit of cognitive behavioral therapy and other change focused work that we're involved in the neural biology of negative emotions and anxiety. So after you learn to change the way that your limbic system reacts, so the emotions come up, once you can, through CBT or another intervention, then you have less reason to worry because you're not processing your experiences the same way anymore. So in some way, you're unlocking and unraveling the spiral of anxiety. And research looks at this from a neural level. So as coaches, we might not actually be using CBT itself, but we are doing change work, of course, with our clients. And we as coaches can help clients learn to deal with their emotions by changing their thoughts and by changing their actions to be consistent with new thoughts, and in so doing lay down some new habits. So coaching can retrain your frontal cortex, the rational part of your brain, to take control over irrational emotions in the limbic system and listen to more useful emotions and help to label and categorize those emotions as useful. So just summing up this piece here, here are the pieces of research, the book Descartes' Error. It is quite old, but it's really interesting. And I think I mentioned it before, but I would, if you're interested in this, then you can Google Eliot's story. It's the detail of it is fascinating. And then the Brazilian research is the last bit that I mentioned about the cognitive behavioural therapy interventions. So coming towards a close here now, my fourth, and I mentioned before there are many issues, but my fourth for today is neuroscience is really good for us because as coaches, because it keeps us learning and keeps us broadening out our focus as well. It helps us, I think, to remain true to ourselves, to build our own self-awareness of our unique strengths when we're in flow, what works for us, what doesn't, when we feel best about ourselves, what our great habits are, what habits are serving us less well, how we can deal with our emotions that come up, what labels we're assigning them, what change work we could do in that area. And it allows us to surface blind spots. And I think also, just as a real simple point, that as there's so much yet to discover in this fascinating area, all of us are going to be able to continue to question, to learn, to explore, and grow into the future, hopefully gaining more and more answers that will help us with our clients around human behaviour and psychology. So thank you for listening if you've got this far. And as I say, there are many more than the 4, but I only really had time to go through the 4 today. Please do feel free to comment. And as David has mentioned to me, do send me a friend request if you want to connect and learn a little bit more about this subject. And also I will go into the comments and discuss in detail. Let me put myself back on screen to say goodbye if I can. See the text not working? Yeah, the text is working there. Okay. So I do thank you very much for listening. I hope you have got to this part of it. Let's stay connected, and I thank David for inviting me. I'm certainly going to be tuning into many of the other speakers on this week. I think it's fantastic to get such an array of topics, and appreciate very much your attention today. Have a fantastic day on February the 4th. Thanks very much. Bye bye now.